You've heard it your whole life. Napoleon was short. The angry little man, the punchline of every cartoon. Tiny guy, huge ego. The original Napoleon Complex. Except it was never true. Napoleon stood about 5'6", maybe 5'7". That was average for a Frenchman. Actually taller than many. So why the short tyrant myth? Propaganda. British propaganda. The British couldn't always beat him in battle, so they beat him in the headlines. Cartoons showed him pocket-sized, stomping his feet, throwing tantrums like a toddler denied a juice box. And people loved it, because ridicule spreads faster than fear. You don't tremble before a man you can laugh at? Then came the math fail. French inches versus English inches. Historians misread the numbers. And suddenly, the lie was confirmed. Imagine losing your reputation because someone couldn't use a ruler. But here's the irony. While kings ruled by God's will, Napoleon actually held votes. Were they perfect? No. But compared to divine right monarchy, they were revolutionary. Still, that didn't fit the joke. Ha ha. Short man was easier to sell. Then he rebuilt France and rewrote its laws. So before we go further, throw away the cartoon. Forget the gremlin in a funny hat. Forget the step stool memes. That's parody. The reality, a Corsican outsider. A soldier who rose faster than anyone thought possible. A man who reinvented war, modernized a nation, and terrified kings who had ruled for centuries. History didn't forget. It lied. And the fact you still think Napoleon was short proves it. Napoleon Bonaparte. Not Parisian. Not royal. He was born on Corsica, a rocky island France had just bought from Genoa. Basically a clearance sale nobody wanted. Corsicans didn't feel French. They felt Corsican, fierce, proud, and constantly mad at Paris. Napoleon's father. A rebel waving a sword one year. A French politician the next. The career equivalent of rage quitting the rebellion and then joining HR for the enemy. At 9 years old, Napoleon left for French military school. He was poor. No noble title. And his accent, so heavy it sounded like a goat trying to rap. His classmates mocked him. He was the island boy, the outsider. But Napoleon didn't fold. He buried himself in books. Math, history, philosophy, artillery manuals. While other boys snuck wine, Napoleon calculated cannon fire. He was that kid, the one nobody invites to parties, who later owns the company. At Brienne, surrounded by aristocrats, he reinvented himself, perfected his French, sharpened his writing. By graduation, critics compared him to Rousseau, from goat rapper accent to razor-sharp intellect. Every insult, every sneer, every laugh at his accent, Napoleon stored them like gunpowder. That chip on his shoulder, the size of Europe, the outsider mocked in school, would one day command France itself. And yet, the Corsican fire never left him. As a teenager, he wrote essays about independence, dreamed of freeing his island. But Corsica was too small for his ambition. The world was a chessboard, and Napoleon was tired of being the pawn. France is chaos. The king is gone. The guillotine is busy. And the country is tearing itself apart. In Toulon, royalist rebels seized the port. They hand it to the British. Disaster. Enter Napoleon. 24. An unknown artillery officer. He looks at the map, places his cannons where nobody else dares. Fires. The British fleet flees. The rebellion collapses. Overnight, Napoleon goes from nobody to national hero. The military version of going viral overnight. Paris explodes in another uprising. Royalists flood the streets. The government panics. They call Napoleon. He lines up his cannons and fires grape shot into the crowd. Hundreds mowed down. It became known as a whiff of grape shot, which is just polite PR for Napoleon blasted civilians to keep the government alive. Here's the irony. The revolution promised liberty, but its hero, a Corsican nerd, who silenced protesters with artillery, not liberty. Law and order at 200 miles per hour. But it worked. The government survived. Napoleon rose. promotion after promotion. The revolution devoured kings. It devoured nobles. It devoured its own leaders. But somehow, Napoleon survived. Not by being more revolutionary, but by being more ruthless. Napoleon gets his first real army, the Army of Italy. Sounds fancy? It wasn't. They were starving, shoeless, unpaid. Basically a cosplay convention of poverty with muskets. Napoleon, just 26, looks at them and says, "Soldiers, you are hungry and naked, but I will lead you to the most fertile plains in the world." Translation: follow me, and we'll rob Italy blind. And the soldiers, they loved it, because nothing motivates quite like the promise of free pizza and loot. Then he delivers. He splits enemy forces, beats them one by one. Fast, precise, ruthless. It wasn't luck. It was genius. The kind of genius that makes other generals look like they're still playing checkers, while Napoleon is already playing 5D chess blindfolded. But here's the real trick. Napoleon didn't just fight. He branded himself. Other generals sent boring reports home. Napoleon sent hype letters. Basically press releases disguised as war updates. Imagine if Dwight Eisenhower also ran BuzzFeed. He flooded newspapers with his victories. Had portraits painted like movie posters. He made himself the star. If he lived today, he'd have a YouTube channel called Battle Vlogs, thumbnails of him pointing dramatically at maps, and merch that says, "Conquer your Monday." Paris ate it up. They didn't see villages looted, peasants robbed, cities bled dry by taxes. They just saw the headlines. Napoleon wins again. That's the power of spin. Italy wasn't just a campaign. It was a launch pad. The place where a hungry outsider became France's superhero, not just with cannons, but with marketing. Napoleon invented the influencer playbook. 2 centuries before Instagram, punchline. He wasn't just conquering Italy, he was conquering public opinion. And honestly, that's harder. Napoleon decides to invade Egypt. Why? Cut Britain's trade routes to India. And also, let's be honest, he wanted dramatic selfies next to pyramids. But this wasn't a normal invasion. He brought 160 scholars, engineers, archaeologists. Imagine D-Day, but with half the boats carrying librarians. At first, it worked. The Battle of the Pyramids, he crushed the Mamluks. Epic victory. Soldiers fighting under ancient monuments. Cinematic. Almost like Michael Bay directed it. Except half his men had dysentery. Then disaster. The British Navy annihilated the French fleet at Aboukir Bay. Napoleon's army was stranded. Supplies ran out. Disease spread. The Egyptian dream turned into a sand-flavored nightmare. But here's the genius. Napoleon spun it. Back home. France didn't see defeat. They saw glory. He sent glowing reports, commissioned heroic paintings. And the scholars, they discovered the Rosetta Stone. So while his army was rotting in the desert, Paris thought he was basically Indiana Jones. Punchline. This wasn't Indiana Jones. It was the Fire Festival. Except instead of no toilets, you had no food, yet the propaganda worked. He came back not as a failed general, but as a visionary, a modern pharaoh, a man of science and conquest. That's the pattern with Napoleon. When reality fell apart, he just rewrote the script. Italy made him famous. Egypt made him untouchable. Because sometimes, the story mattered more than the truth. France is collapsing. The revolution has eaten itself alive. Leaders guillotined. Government swapping faster than Netflix passwords. Enter Napoleon. He stages the coup of 18 Brumaire. Pushes politicians aside. By age 30, he's first consul. Basically CEO of France. And then, in 1804, he goes full upgrade. Emperor? But not like kings. No, God gave me the throne. Napoleon held a vote. Was it perfect? Of course not. But compared to divine right monarchy, it looked like a democracy keg party. And the ceremony, legendary. The Pope is there, ready to crown him. Napoleon snatches the crown and puts it on his own head. Symbolism. Thanks, God. I'll take it from here. Now, tyrant or not, the guy actually built stuff. The Napoleonic Code, still the backbone of law in dozens of countries. Public education, a central bank, a modern bureaucracy. He didn't just sit on a throne. He gave France a software update. Meanwhile, Europe's blue blood aristocrats sneered. How dare this outsider crown himself? But Napoleon's system wasn't about birth. It was about talent. A meritocracy. For kings, he was a monster. For citizens, he was progress. Punchline. Compared to the old monarchs, Napoleon was basically Bernie Sanders, with a better tailor and way more cannons. So was he a tyrant? Depends who you ask. To Europe's royalty, he was a nightmare. To ordinary Frenchmen, he was stability. And to history, he was complicated, which never fits neatly in a cartoon. By 1810, Napoleon ruled most of Europe. Austria beaten, Prussia humiliated. Maps redrawn like doodles in his notebook. He looked unstoppable. But power is addictive, and Napoleon overdosed. First stop, Spain. He thought it would be easy. Kick out the king. Install his brother Joseph. Simple. Except the Spanish people said, absolutely not. Farmers, priests, villagers with kitchen knives. They fought dirty. Ambushes, assassinations, sabotage. The word guerrilla was born here. Napoleon invented the occupation. Spain invented the insurgency. It was France's Vietnam, except with donkeys instead of helicopters. Then came Russia, 1812. Napoleon marched in with 600,000 men, the largest army Europe had ever seen. The Russians retreated, burned their own cities, left nothing behind. Napoleon reached Moscow. Victory? Nope. The city was empty and on fire. Then winter hit. Temperatures plunged. Horses froze. Soldiers starved. Entire regiments vanished. By the time they staggered home, 100,000 left from 600,000. It wasn't an army anymore. It was a ghost. Punchline. Napoleon basically bought the winter expansion pack and rage quit halfway through. Spain bled him. Russia broke him. The myth of invincibility was gone. And when you stop looking unbeatable, every enemy remembers how to fight. Coalitions formed. Armies gathered. Waterloo sealed his fate. One moment he was Emperor of Europe. The next, he was cargo on a British ship, bound for exile. Exiled to St. Helena, middle of nowhere. A rock in the Atlantic. From Emperor of Europe to lonely prisoner with nothing but ink and paper. And what did Napoleon do? He wrote memoir, letters, his own version of history. If he couldn't rule the continent, he'd rule the narrative. And here's the kicker. He wasn't wrong about his legacy. The Napoleonic Code, still the backbone of law in over 70 countries. Public education, central banking, a modern bureaucracy, all outlived him. He didn't just chase glory. He built systems that survived kings and empires. But history remembers the cartoon. The angry short man, the gremlin in the funny hat, the guy with Napoleon Complex. Why? Because propaganda is sticky. Lies are funnier than facts. Punchline. The British couldn't beat him on the battlefield, so they turned him into a meme. And 2 centuries later, you're still laughing at the joke. But here's the irony. Without Napoleon, Europe doesn't modernize. Without him, France doesn't transform. The kings who mocked him are forgotten. But the short tyrant still shapes your legal system today. So what's the truth? Napoleon wasn't a gremlin. He wasn't a step stool joke. He was an outsider who clawed his way to the top. A reformer who terrified kings. A man who reshaped a continent. History didn't just forget him, it lied about him. And the fact you still think he was short, that's the proof.